will fight on both fronts, the corruption, internal problems, political problems, and the Russians at our side. That's what will define our victory.
For the first time today, trilateral peace talks to end the war in Ukraine will take place on European soil. The talks, designed to build on the Abu Dhabi discussions, are expected to address a broad range of issues. President Zelensky has attempted to demonstrate his willingness to negotiate by floating the idea of elections in Ukraine. Critics have dismissed Russian participation as disingenuous at best. So what can be achieved? Well, we're joined now by the former Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, Vadym Prystaiko, who's also served as Ukraine's foreign minister. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell us first how much hope you have for this particular round of talks? What might make it different this time?
I don't believe that many Ukrainians expect anything specific from these negotiations. What we at least see that the negotiations made the whole yearly turn, and we're at the starting point when at least everybody understands where each and every side is. Russians could not get through, although we were telling Trump that it will be finished soon. Americans cannot get all of us at the table and sign something before they need to go to elections, or whatever their real reason is. Europeans understand that is worked for long, and they have to actually get engaged totally, but start to scratch the bottom of the weapon caches. And we are surviving through the very harsh winter. The spring is coming, but we also could not get them, as we promised to our own nation, to get them to the borders of 1991. So everybody is there and just waiting for the new season.
So, I mean, you mentioned borders there. One of the key things that feels different this time around, and I fully accept what you're saying, that there isn't a huge amount of hope being held out for some kind of breakthrough here. But one of the changes does seem to be that there is a willingness to discuss possible boundaries, maybe some kind of agreement in those areas, the territory which Russia says now belongs to it, and of course Ukraine says that's incorrect. Some kind of demilitarized zone, some kind of compromise. Is that possible, do you think?
Yeah, you're actually right. Before nobody was seriously, at least publicly or formally recognized in Ukraine that we might have to talk about our territory being changed forcefully, forced through whatever the forced negotiations we're having. This is something which allows Americans and Russians to see the way out. At least Russia is trying to crank down the expectations. But what's the factor I don't like, as yesterday's Lavrov's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Russians statement that delegations are going to discuss the territorial and other important issues for the negotiations. So they are not saying that this is the only and the key issue. They will come with something as soon as we resolve this. But let's not get in front of ourselves. Let's see how this particular negotiations phase can go.
So you're saying there that Sergei Lavrov, who's the Russian foreign minister, ups the ante. So as soon as you talk about the possibility of an agreement on territory, then Russia adds something else to the table, making it very difficult to agree. Can I ask you where you think the UK, the Europeans, the Americans stand at the moment? Are you seeing enough support from those countries, enough pressure put on Russia?
Obviously, because the Europeans now is the partner which supplying the support. I'm not talking about weapons only. The budget, the day-to-day living, the energy, electricity, more or less 60+% of how we survive, financially wise or technically wise, is actually coming from Europe this time. America is keen on selling, but somebody has to pick up the bill. And that Europeans are doing, finally understanding that's not about Ukraine. The next in line are them, all of them. And if they understand actually that Ukraine is not just some border, some neutral, whatever the sanitary, whatever they call zone, just before the Europe, but actually Europe itself, it will be much easier to swallow that we have to do something. We have to find another missile, another $1 billion to help them survive, because that's not Ukraine, that's us already, Europeans.
One of the things, Vadym, that we hear a lot about is the way that Russia is targeting civilians now by cutting off the power, targeting the sort of energy plants, basically. And Kyiv particularly was suffering in the very deep cold of winter. Have you seen any let-up there? I mean, what is morale like in the country at the moment?
I can tell you that a third of Ukrainian apartments are not heated now, and the heat will not return back until the end of this season. That's how tough life here. And electricity is around 3-4 hours a day. So you cannot have heat because it is very much centralized, unlike in your case. In Ukraine, it's much centralized, and that's the nodes and electric stations Russians are targeting. At the same time, you cannot use the electric heating because there is no electricity. But people's morale is quite supportive to what the government is trying to achieve, and that's what allows us to make another step, and our military to feel safe in its whatever safe word is in their trenches, knowing that back home the political situation and economic is still stable, and we can go another mile.
And yet there are still questions about corruption in the government, and there are still questions about how legitimate. I mean, there's one of President Zelensky's closest aides, some very serious questions about him trying to leave the country and about some corruption allegations. I mean, that's obviously damaging.
Yeah, I don't even want to start that. We should have done it all before, a long time, all the 30 years of our independence, to clear out it, because that's eating our strengths, eating our ability to survive and defend ourselves. Whether we understand it, and we'll fight on both fronts, the corruption, internal problems, political problems, and the Russians on our side, that's what will define our victory.
Would you support President Zelensky serving for another term as president?
Yeah, well, when I was his foreign secretary, I told him immediately that he doesn't have to tell that he is not going to run, which was he was saying all this years along.
Yes.
Now he came to realization that so much has to be done, and he believes in his ability to do it, and the people around him to go for another term, which is, I mean, quite usual for politicians, and many Ukrainians will support it.
Yeah.
We will see, though, how the end of the war will look like, because that's what will define who is the next president of Ukraine.
Yes, very much so. It's interesting that you will support him in that. I just want to ask you finally, one of your athletes, one of Ukraine's athletes, was disqualified by the International Olympic Committee for wearing a helmet that featured the war dead, some of the war dead from Ukraine. Was the IOC right to ban him? I mean, how did you feel about him being banned?
You know, I've seen him just in Munich conference 2 days ago, this particular athlete. And interestingly enough, the pictures on the helmet was actually not just any Ukrainians, which we lost so many of them very unfortunately, but the athletes,
yes,
Olympic athletes being killed, his colleagues. That was the whole meaning of this helmet. Not to bring any tragic picture of any Ukrainian, and he was not playing on this, sensitivity. He was showing that the athletes are targeted and killed, and then he wanted to celebrate the Olympic Games. And probably this was misunderstood, or was taken so bureaucratically that Ukrainians were just outraged, totally.
Yeah, I think many outside of Ukraine felt the same way. Vadym Prystaiko, thank you very much for giving us your time this morning.
Thank you.
That is the former Ukrainian ambassador to the UK.